Knights, myth versus reality. The knight rides into battle, armor glinting in the sun. He lowers his lance, fearless and noble, sworn to protect the weak and uphold honor. He is chivalry. He is glory. At least, that's what the legends say. But behind the shining armor lies a much darker truth. Most knights were not romantic heroes. They were warlords, mercenaries, and ruthless enforcers of power. The real story of medieval knighthood is one of blood, ambition, and a constant struggle for dominance. Today, we strip away 800 years of myth to uncover who knights truly were. Knights have become icons, stars of movies, video games, and legends. We imagine King Arthur, the Knights Templar, and heroic duels for honor. But that story was crafted by poets, not peasants, by noble chroniclers, not the people who suffered under a knight's sword. To understand the truth, we must go back to the violent birth of knighthood, to a time when armor wasn't a symbol of honor. It was a tool of terror. Birth of the knight. Knighthood didn't begin with romance, it began with chaos. When the Roman Empire collapsed in Western Europe, law and order crumbled. Power fell to local warlords who ruled by the sword. By the 9th and 10th centuries, Europe was a battlefield, raided by Vikings from the north, Magyars from the east, and Muslim armies from the south. Kings were weak. Survival depended on warriors. Enter the mounted soldier. Feared and unstoppable, heavy cavalry became the most powerful force in medieval warfare. These warriors fought for pay, plunder, and land. They were not yet called knights, just armed horsemen. But soon, kings and nobles realized if they gave these warriors land in exchange for loyalty, they could build armies without paying them every battle. This system became feudalism, and land-owning soldiers became knights. The word knight simply meant servant, but make no mistake, these were the most dangerous men in medieval Europe. Training a knight, brutal beginnings. Becoming a knight was not like joining a noble order. It was more like becoming a weapon. Boys of noble birth were sent away at age 7 to train as pages. They learned manners, religion, and most importantly, obedience. At 14, they became squires, training under a knight. They learned to fight with sword, lance, mace, and dagger. They learned to ride in full armor. They learned to kill. Despite the poetic tales, training was harsh and violent. Injuries were common. Deaths in training tournaments were not rare. A knight had to be tough enough to survive the battlefield, and merciless enough to win. At age 21, if they survived, they could be knighted. Some received a ceremonial blow to the neck, the accolade, to remind them that honor came with pain. Others, especially in earlier times, were knighted on the battlefield, blood still on their swords. The myth of chivalry. When we think of knights, we think of the code of chivalry: honor, bravery, protecting the weak. But here's the truth. Chivalry was a lie, or rather, a fantasy. The idea of chivalry came from poets and churchmen who were desperate to control the brutality of knights. Knights spent most of their time fighting, raiding villages, enforcing taxes, and crushing peasant revolts. So the church tried to tame them. It created ideals like honor in combat, loyalty to your lord, protection of women and the weak, fighting for justice. But knights rarely followed these ideals. They swore oaths, but broke them if profitable. They promised honor, but looted churches during war. They pledged loyalty, but changed sides for money. Chivalry wasn't how knights behaved. Chivalry was how people wished they behaved. Armor, weapons, and reality of combat. Let's talk about what knights were really like in battle. Forget Hollywood duels with perfect sword swings. Real combat was brutal, exhausting, and dirty. Early knights wore chainmail, called a hauberk. Later, in the 14th and 15th centuries, they upgraded to full plate armor. But despite the myth, armor was not heavy and clumsy. It weighed 50 to 60 pounds, less than a modern firefighter's gear. Knights could run, climb ladders, even perform somersaults. Weapons, knights used swords, but the sword was a sidearm. Real battlefield killers were lances for the cavalry charge, warhammers to crush armor, poleaxes, deadly in duels, maces, favored by brutal warriors, daggers for finishing off enemies through armor gaps. Combat wasn't elegant. Knights wrestled, tackled, smashed skulls, and stabbed through visors. And yes, they killed horses too. War horses were massive, armored beasts trained to crash into infantry. Taking out the horse was a fast way to kill the knight. Tournament or blood sport? We think of tournaments as glamorous medieval festivals, colorful banners, courtly love, gallant duels. Wrong. Early tournaments were mock battles fought across open fields by hundreds of knights, violent brawls where death was common. Knights fought in teams trying to capture enemies for ransom. Helmets were dented, bones shattered, skulls split open. These games were so dangerous that kings regularly banned them. But knights didn't care. They lived for glory, gold, and violence. Only in later centuries did tournaments become safer and more ceremonial, with controlled jousting replacing mass battles. Even then, they were deadly. King Henry II of France died in a jousting accident in 1559, his eye pierced by a splintered lance. Knights and the business of war. Knights fought not just for honor, but for profit. Medieval warfare was an economy. The true path to wealth wasn't killing enemies, it was capturing them. High-ranking knights and nobles were worth fortunes in ransom. A single prisoner could make a knight wealthy for life. That's why many medieval battles were full of knights trying to capture, not kill, valuable opponents. After all, dead men pay no ransom. Fame mattered too. A knight with a powerful reputation could intimidate enemies before a battle even began. Medieval warfare was as much psychological as physical. The dark side, knights as enforcers. Knights weren't noble heroes to everyone. To peasants, they were often tyrants. Knights enforced feudal law, tax collection, land seizure, and brutal punishment. Many knights waged private wars against rival lords, burning villages and slaughtering civilians in the process. Bandit knights, called robber barons, controlled castles and terrorized entire regions, robbing travelers and raiding towns. They were medieval warlords, and no one could stop them. Even during the Crusades, knights looted cities, massacred civilians, and fought with each other as much as with the enemy. Chivalry didn't follow them to the Holy Land. Women and knighthood, the forgotten reality. Knighthood was a male-dominated world, but not exclusively. A few women warriors took up the sword. Jeanne de Clisson, the Lioness of Brittany, became a pirate to avenge her husband. Joan of Arc led French armies and turned the tide of the 100 Years' War. Matilda of Tuscany commanded armies during the investiture controversy. Nicola de la Haye defended Lincoln Castle against siege. Women couldn't officially become knights, but a few were granted the title of dame and even honored in knightly orders. The myth that women never fought in medieval warfare is just that, a myth. The fall of the knight. For centuries, the knight ruled the battlefield. But then, the world changed. At the Battle of Crécy in 1346, thousands of English longbowmen rained arrows on French knights, slaughtering them before they even reached the fight. It was a turning point. Skill and discipline could now defeat wealth and armor. Then came gunpowder, cannons, handguns, professional armies. Mounted knights became obsolete. By the 16th century, they were relics, outdated warriors in an age of gunfire and steel. But the idea of the knight didn't die. It transformed. Legacy, from killer to legend. As knights vanished from warfare, poets and writers resurrected them, not as mercenaries, but as heroes of a lost age. They wrote tales of King Arthur and Camelot, of noble quests and holy relics, of noble love and chivalry. The brutal knight became the romantic knight. And that myth lives on today. Every time we play a medieval video game, watch a sword epic, or see a shining suit of armor, we're not seeing history. We're seeing the legend that survived. But behind it all lies a harsher truth. Knights weren't symbols of honor. They were instruments of power. Conclusion. So, were knights noble heroes or ruthless killers? The truth is, they were both. They fought for God, glory, and gold. They brought order and chaos. They built castles and burned villages. They swore oaths of honor, then broke them when it suited their ambition. They were men shaped by a violent age, and that age forged one of history's greatest myths. But here at TorchLit History, we don't settle for myth. We uncover the truth behind it. If you enjoyed uncovering the real story of medieval knights, hit like and subscribe to TorchLit History, where we bring the Middle Ages to life without the fairy tales. Drop a comment below. Would you have survived as a knight or been crushed under their rule? And don't miss our next episode, the most feared medieval weapons ranked. Because history isn't just something to learn, it's something to feel.